Guard Captain Ryan had learned over the course of his career that standing perfectly still was an underrated art. On the Aurelian Palace Bridge, stillness was not merely discipline, it was survival. The floor beneath his boots shimmered with a soft blue translucence, revealing a slow drift of glowing energy currents far below, as if the palace itself were floating on a calm, luminous sea. The air carried a faint metallic sweetness, recycled through alien filters that hummed with a frequency just shy of annoying. Ryan stood exactly 3 steps behind Princess Elara, as protocol demanded, his posture flawless, his expression neutral, his thoughts significantly less regulated. Elara paused near the panoramic archway, gazing out at the ringed planet hanging in the distance. Its bands glowed amber and violet, colors no human sky had ever learned to imitate properly. One of her long ears twitched, just once sharp and expressive, before settling again. Ryan noticed. He always noticed. He told himself this was professional awareness. The palace security manual, unfortunately, did not include a section explaining why professional awareness made his pulse do strange, enthusiastic things. "Captain," Elara said lightly without turning around, "if you continue standing that rigidly, I fear the palace maintenance drones may mistake you for a decorative pillar." Ryan cleared his throat. "My apologies, Your Highness. I will attempt to appear less architectural." Her lips curved into a smile. It was small, contained, but it carried dangerous potential. One of the palace translators hovering nearby emitted a soft chime, clearly pleased to be witnessing humor in action. Ryan hated that the machines were better at relaxing than he was. Elara turned at last, her silver-toned robes shifting as if woven from liquid light. Up close, she looked almost human. Same gentle curve of cheek, same expressive eyes, until one noticed the long ears sweeping back elegantly from her hair, adorned with delicate data thread jewelry that pulsed faintly with incoming court notifications. She studied him with open curiosity, the kind that made lying feel impolite. "You know," she said, "on my world, guards are encouraged to breathe." "I am breathing," Ryan replied immediately. There was a pause. "Technically." She laughed then, a warm sound that echoed softly against the energy walls. The tension Ryan carried loosened by exactly 0.5 millimeter, which he considered progress. Humor, he had learned, was Elara's preferred method of disarming everyone around her, including, most unfairly, him. The Aurelian Palace was a marvel of cooperative alien engineering, grown rather than built, its corridors shifting subtly to accommodate foot traffic, its ceilings adjusting height based on the tallest species present. Ryan had once watched a ceiling rise politely to avoid brushing the antennae of a visiting insectoid diplomat. The ceiling had apologized afterward. Elara had found this delightful. Ryan had found it unsettling. Apologetic architecture made him nervous. They began walking again, the floor responding to their steps with gentle pulses of light. Ryan adjusted his pace to remain exactly where he belonged, close enough to intercept danger, far enough to respect boundaries written in laws older than his species' recorded history. This was the balance he lived in. This, and the constant awareness of Elara's presence, which occupied his mind like a background process, consuming far too many resources. "Council session in 10 minutes, Elara said. "Do you think they'll argue about trade tariffs or moral philosophy today?" "Statistically," Ryan said, "both, simultaneously." She nodded solemnly. "I suspected as much. Last time Ambassador Trelk managed to turn a discussion about grain exports into an accusation that reality itself was culturally biased." Ryan allowed himself a brief smile before remembering himself and smoothing it away. He was very passionate. "And very wrong," Elara added cheerfully. "Reality is biased in my favor. I've checked." Ryan bit down on a laugh. It escaped anyway, quiet but real. One of Elara's ears flicked again, this time unmistakably pleased. He looked away, focusing on a security drone gliding past, its optic sensors swiveling like curious eyes. The drone beeped at him in greeting. Ryan nodded back. This was his life now, exchanging polite acknowledgments with sentient machinery, while trying very hard not to fall in love with the princess he was sworn to protect. Months earlier, when he had accepted the assignment, he'd been told it was prestigious, an honor, a chance to represent humanity at the heart of an alien empire, known for its honesty, its advanced technology, and its very firm rules about interpersonal boundaries. Ryan had nodded, signed the documents, and assured everyone involved that he was exceptionally good at following rules. This had been true. Mostly, what no one had warned him about was Elara's habit of talking to him like he was a person rather than a position, or the way she remembered details, his preference for bitter calf, his mild allergy to pollen from the palace gardens, the fact that he once admitted, under mild anesthesia, that he thought long ears were kind of elegant. She had never let him forget that. As they approached the council chamber, the doors irised open, revealing a space alive with color, holograms, and low murmurs in a dozen languages. Ryan straightened instinctively, slipping back into his role as easily as armor. Elara paused before entering, just long enough to glance at him. "Captain Ryan," she said softly, "thank you for not being a pillar today." He met her gaze for half a second longer than protocol allowed. "Anytime, Your Highness." The doors closed behind them, sealing in politics, expectations, and unspoken things that hovered between them like unacknowledged stars. Ryan resumed his place at her side, alert, composed, and painfully aware that maintaining distance was becoming the hardest mission he had ever accepted. The council chamber had opinions about everyone who entered it. Ryan was fairly certain of this, because the lighting brightened whenever Princess Elara crossed the threshold and dimmed, subtly but pointedly, when he followed. The chamber was a vast, circular space where gravity behaved itself only out of politeness, and even then, not consistently. Holographic constellations rotated above a central dais, rearranging themselves to reflect the political mood of the room. At the moment, they resembled a tangled knot. Elara moved with practiced ease to her position, her long ears angling slightly backward, as if bracing for impact. Ryan took his place beside her, the familiar half-step behind, scanning the room with enhanced optics that highlighted potential threats, hidden weapons, and, somewhat unhelpfully, elevated stress levels. According to his implant, several ambassadors were already emotionally compromised. One of them was glowing faintly red. Ryan made a mental note to stand closer. The first voice to rise belonged to Ambassador Trelk, whose species resembled an upright amphibian wearing ceremonial armor that looked suspiciously like a collection of soup bowls. "The proposed energy corridor violates the metaphysical neutrality of shared space," Trelk declared. "Also, it is rude." Elara leaned slightly toward Ryan without turning her head. "Metaphysical neutrality," she murmured. "That's 3 sessions in a row." He's building momentum. Ryan kept his eyes forward. "If he reaches 5, he gets a free existential crisis." Her lips twitched. One ear flicked. The council drones hovered attentively, projecting translation fields and emotional context overlays. One of them helpfully labeled the current atmosphere as tense but performative. Ryan appreciated the honesty. The Aurelians valued truth so highly that even their machines had no sense of tact. As debate swirled, Elara listened, responded, redirected. She was brilliant at it, threading logic and empathy through alien worldview without offending anyone too deeply. Ryan had seen her dismantle an argument using nothing but calm phrasing and a gentle smile. He had also seen her reduce a hostile negotiator to tears by asking one sincere question. Today she was doing both, and Ryan's admiration was becoming a logistical problem. During a pause, an aide approached with a data slate. Elara accepted it, brows knitting slightly. Her ears dipped. Ryan noticed immediately. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. "Minor," she said. "The Eastern Defense Grid is reporting a calibration hiccup. Nothing dangerous. Allegedly." Ryan's implant chimed. Allegedly was never reassuring. "I'll notify Security Command. Please don't start a palace-wide alert unless the walls actually begin screaming," she added. "I make no promises." She smiled again, and this time he didn't quite manage to look away fast enough. For a fraction of a second, the chamber faded. There was just the quiet hum of energy, the faint glow of her jewelry, the soft curve of familiarity that had grown between them without permission. A cough echoed. Ryan snapped back to attention. Ambassador Vesh, a silicon-based life form shaped like a floating crystal lattice, was staring at them. or vibrating disapprovingly. It was hard to tell. Is this an appropriate moment, Vesh resonated, for private exchanges? Elara straightened, utterly unflustered. Captain Ryan was reminding me that reality has not yet collapsed. I find this information comforting. Several council members nodded. One applauded. Vesh emitted a confused hum and retreated. Ryan exhaled slowly. Humor, he reminded himself. Humor was safer than honesty. The session dragged on, eventually dissolving into procedural voting and ceremonial declarations. When the final constellation above them settled into a loose spiral, symbolic of tentative agreement, Elara rose, signaling adjournment. The chamber doors opened with a sigh that sounded relieved. As they exited into a quieter corridor, Elara rolled her shoulders, tension finally releasing. If I hear the phrase cultural inevitability one more time today, I may authorize a new law banning it. I support this initiative, Ryan said, for security reasons. She laughed, softer now, and walked beside him rather than ahead. The corridor adjusted accordingly, widening just enough to accommodate the breach of protocol without comment. The palace was observant like that. Ryan wondered if the walls noticed his heart rate. They reached a balcony overlooking the inner gardens, where bioluminescent plants pulsed gently, responding to unseen stimuli. Elara stopped, resting her hands on the railing. Her ears relaxed, angling outward. Ryan took up position nearby, though the danger level was minimal. The garden had been cleared of threats weeks ago. It had also been cleared of anything sharp, explosive, or emotionally triggering at Elara's request. Captain, she said after a moment, do you ever regret taking this assignment? The question landed heavier than she intended. Ryan considered his answer carefully. No, he said. I regret underestimating it. She glanced at him, curiosity bright. In what way? In every way that matter, he replied, then immediately wished he had phrased that differently. Silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but full. The plants below shimmered, reacting to the subtle shift in emotional energy. Elara watched them, thoughtful. You are very good at your job, she said, almost inconveniently so. He smiled faintly. I've been told. Her ears tilted toward him. The moment lingered, suspended like a held breath in low gravity. Somewhere deeper in the palace, a system chimed. Routine diagnostics, nothing urgent. Life continued, oblivious to the quiet complexity forming between a princess and her guard. Ryan returned to his post as Elara straightened and prepared to move on. Duty reclaimed its shape. Distance reasserted itself. But something had shifted, just slightly, like a star adjusting its orbit, and both of them felt it, even as they pretended not to. The first warning arrived disguised as politeness. A soft chime rippled through the palace corridors, the kind usually reserved for schedule reminders or the building's occasional need to apologize for rerouting gravity. Ryan felt it before he consciously registered it. An itch behind his left eye where his neural implant lived. The itch translated into a quiet internal message. Anomaly detected. He slowed half a step, instincts tightening. Princess Elara was mid-sentence, explaining, again, why a ceremonial dinner did not require 7 separate types of seating based on spinal flexibility. She noticed his change in pace immediately. One ear angled back toward him. Captain, she said casually, still walking, you've made that face. I don't make faces, Ryan replied. You make that one, she said. The one that means something is wrong, but you're deciding whether to inconvenience anyone about it. He sighed. There's a minor fluctuation in the Eastern Defense Grid. Her shoulders slumped. Of course there is. They rounded a corner, the corridor briefly narrowing before expanding again, as if embarrassed by its earlier lack of foresight. Overhead, a line of security drones glided past faster than normal, their optics glowing a slightly more aggressive shade of blue. Define minor, Elara said. Minor enough that the system hasn't started screaming, Ryan said. Major enough that it stopped humming cheerfully. She winced. That's never a good middle ground. No, he agreed. That's usually when something interesting happens. As if summoned by the word interesting, the lights flickered. Just once. Quick. Almost polite. Elara stopped walking. Ryan was already moving. He stepped closer, hand hovering near the weapon, sealed into his forearm armor, eyes scanning for threats that might not exist yet, But we're thinking about it. The palace air changed, the metallic sweetness sharpening into something tense. Ryan, Elara said quietly. She didn't sound frightened. She sounded alert. Tell me that was scheduled. It was not, he said. The floor rippled beneath them, a subtle wave passing through the translucent surface like a shiver. Somewhere far away, something thumped. Not an explosion. Too contained. More like a very large object politely colliding with something it shouldn't have. Ryan's implant lit up with cascading alerts now. No longer shy. Spatial distortion, power rerouting, unauthorized phase activity. Well, Elara said, attempting levity with admirable determination. On the bright side, at least it's not boring. The corridor lights cut out entirely. Emergency illumination flared a heartbeat later, bathing everything in a soft amber glow. Gravity hiccuped. Ryan felt the world tilt. His boots lost contact with the floor for a half-second before slamming back down at a new angle. Elara stumbled, and instinct overrode protocol completely. He grabbed her arm, pulling her against him as the corridor rotated 15 degrees to the left. They ended up leaning together, the palace apparently deciding that sideways was acceptable for now. Elara blinked. I knew I should have stayed in bed. Your Highness, Ryan said, steadying them both. I need you to stay close. She looked up at him. Too close. Her long ears brushed his shoulder as she nodded. I was planning on it. A distant alarm finally sounded. Not a wail, but a layered harmonic that vibrated through bone and circuitry alike. The palace was officially concerned. Ryan's comm crackled. Security command to Captain Ryan. We're seeing phase shift signatures near the eastern wing. Unknown origin. Copy, Ryan said. I'm with the princess near the inner corridors, initiating evacuation protocol. Negative, the voice replied. Corridor maps are changing. Ryan glanced down the hall. Where there should have been a straight path to the secure chambers, the corridor now looped back on itself, curving gently like a question mark. The walls shimmered, briefly translucent, revealing another hallway behind them that definitely hadn't been there before. Elara stared. The palace is folding space again, isn't it? Yes, Ryan said, and it looks offended. Another jolt ran through the structure. This time, gravity gave up pretending entirely. They lifted off the floor, drifting upward in slow, undignified arcs. Elara let out a surprised laugh as her feet floated up. Oh, this is new. Ryan grabbed a handhold that emerged helpfully from the wall, one of the palace's many adaptive features, and pulled them both toward it. Elara clutched the railing beside him, her robes billowing like they were underwater. I'd like to formally request that we survive this, she said. I second that request, Ryan said. Forcefully. They pushed off, navigating the corridor with careful movements as emergency thrusters kicked in, attempting to reassert order. The palace was good at many things. Being attacked by people who understood its weaknesses was apparently not one of them. A security drone zipped past, spinning slightly as it adjusted to the altered gravity. Attention, it chimed. Please remain calm. This situation is statistically inconvenient, but not yet fatal, Elara snorted. Comforting. They reached an intersection that refused to behave. The corridor split into 3, then 2, then 3 again, rearranging itself mid-glide. Ryan cursed under his breath. Elara, he said, making a decision. We're not following standard routes. She looked at him. You sound very certain for someone whose palace just tried to become abstract art. I trust my instincts more than the architecture right now. She smiled faintly. Then lead on, Captain. He guided them toward a maintenance passage that shimmered uncertainly, its existence fluctuating like a bad memory. As they crossed the threshold, the air changed again. Denser, quieter. The hum of the palace faded to a distant echo. The space beyond was smaller, older. The walls were solid, unyielding, etched with ancient alien circuitry that glowed a steady, stubborn green. Gravity returned with a thud that made Elara stumble again. This time she didn't pull away from him when he steadied her. For a moment they just stood there, breathing. Close. Too close. The alarms felt far away. Elara looked up at him, her expression serious now beneath the lingering humor. Ryan, she said softly, this is more than a malfunction, isn't it? Yes, he admitted. Someone is trying very hard to reach you. Her ears angled back, but her voice stayed calm. Then we should assume they might succeed. His jaw tightened. Not if I have anything to say about it. She studied his face, really studied it, as if committing something to memory. Then she nodded once. All right, let's inconvenience them. Somewhere beyond the walls, the palace groaned as another spatial fold rippled outward. Ryan positioned himself between Elara and the corridor entrance. Every sense sharpened, every thought focused on one undeniable truth. This was no longer just about duty, and the universe, it seemed, was done pretending otherwise. The maintenance chamber was not designed for comfort, heroics, or emotional revelations. It was designed to exist stubbornly when everything else decided to misbehave. The walls were matte and old, absorbing light instead of reflecting it, etched with alien circuitry that pulsed at a steady rhythm like a patient heartbeat. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something mineral, grounding in a way the rest of the palace was currently failing to be. Ryan stood in front of Elara, weapon partially deployed from his forearm, senses stretched thin. His implant continued to feed him information he did not like. Overlapping phase signatures, external interference, internal systems arguing with each other like siblings during a crisis. Somewhere beyond the chamber, the palace twisted space with all the grace of a startled animal. Elara, for her part, was remarkably composed. She smoothed her robes, which had decided to cling sideways thanks to lingering gravity inconsistencies, and glanced around the room. Well, she said, if we're going to be trapped anywhere, at least it's not the ceremonial archive. Last time I was sealed in there, the historical holograms wouldn't stop narrating. Ryan snorted before he could stop himself. That sounds horrifying. One of them kept insisting I was destined to make a choice that would echo across centuries. Very dramatic, very unhelpful. He allowed himself a breath, then another. Humor helped. It always did. It kept the fear from crystallizing into something heavier. His calm crackled again, distorted. Ryan, signal unstable. Can't lock onto your position. I hear you, Ryan said, tapping the side of his head. You're breaking up. So is the palace, came the strained reply. We're rerouting defense drones, but phase interference is blocking direct access. You may be static, on your own for several minutes. Ryan glanced back at Elara. Several minutes was a very long time when someone was actively trying to break reality to get to her. Understood, he said. We'll hold. The channel cut. Elara tilted her head, one long ear angling toward him. You said that like it was reassuring. It was meant to be, he said. Possibly more for me than for you. She smiled, small but sincere. I appreciate the effort. Another tremor rolled through the chamber, gentler this time but deeper, like something massive shifting its weight nearby. The circuitry on the walls brightened, responding defensively. They're close, Ryan muttered. Yes, Elara said. I gathered that from the palace trying to shed us like an inconvenient memory. He turned to face her fully then, stepping closer without thinking. The space was small enough that protocol became theoretical. Her eyes met his, steady and bright despite everything. He became acutely aware of how close they were, of the faint warmth radiating from her, of the way her ears had gone completely still. Elara, he said quietly, dropping the title without realizing it. If this chamber fails, if they breach, I need you to run. There's an auxiliary exit behind you. It should lead deeper into the old core. She looked past him to the wall, then back at his face. And you? I'll stay here. That wasn't an answer. It was, he said. Her brows drew together. Ryan? He swallowed. The sound of his name, just his name, landed harder than any impact. This is my job. That's not all it is, she said, voice firm now. Not anymore. Another shockwave hit, stronger this time. The lights flickered. A hairline crack appeared in the far wall, shimmering with unstable energy. Whatever was coming was no longer subtle. Ryan felt something inside him shift, snap. All the careful distance, the practiced restraint, the months of pretending that awareness was not affection, and affection was not agony. None of it held under the weight of the moment. He laughed softly once, breathless and disbelieving. You know, I always assumed if I ever said the wrong thing to you, it would be in a quiet corridor or during a diplomatic disaster, not while the universe was actively trying to kill us. Elara blinked. Ryan, I can't keep doing this, he said, the words tumbling out now, unarmored. Standing near you, watching you, pretending I don't think about you constantly. Pretending that protecting you hasn't become personal in ways the manuals didn't prepare me for. Another crack split the wall, energy spilling through like light through broken glass. I love you, he said. The words felt unreal and inevitable all at once. I've loved you for months. I tried to bury it under duty and professionalism and bad jokes, but I can't hide it anymore. And I know this is inappropriate and reckless and probably career-ending, but if this is the last thing I ever say to you, I need it to be true. Silence fell, not because the palace was calm, but because Elara had stopped breathing. For half a heartbeat, she just stared at him. Then her face crumpled. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him with sudden, fierce strength, pressing her forehead against his chest. Her long ears flattened against his shoulders as she clutched him like he was the only solid thing left in a folding universe. Oh, Ryan, she whispered, her voice breaking. You have no idea how relieved I am that you finally said it. He froze, stunned. What? She laughed through tears, the sound muffled against him. Do you think it's been easy for me? Watching you stand there pretending you're just my guard, when every instinct I have is screaming that you're more than that? He hesitated, then slowly, carefully, wrapped his arms around her. The world did not end. If anything, it steadied. I couldn't say anything, she continued. I'm the princess. You're my protector. Every rule we have exists to stop exactly this. And yet, she pulled back just enough to look up at him, eyes bright and wet. When you thought we were about to die, you gave me permission to be honest too. A distant explosion echoed through the palace, followed by a sound like something very expensive breaking. Ryan let out a shaky laugh. So this is mutual? Yes, she said. Inconveniently, dangerously, completely. They held each other as another tremor passed, the chamber's ancient systems reinforcing themselves around them. For a moment, just one, they forgot about attackers and politics and consequences. Then a defense drone slammed through the cracked wall, weapons hot, followed by 3 more. Outside, the palace roared as security forces finally regained control, phase distortions collapsing under concentrated counterfields. Elara pulled back, breathless, still holding on to him. I suppose, she said softly, that hugging during an active assault is frowned upon. Probably, Ryan agreed, but I regret nothing. The alarms began to fade, replaced by steadier tones. The worst had passed. They stood there, still close, reality settling back into place with all its inconvenient weight. Ryan knew, even as relief washed over him, that this moment had changed everything. The confession had been the easy part. What came after would be far harder. Reality returned the way it usually did. Awkwardly, noisily, and with far too much paperwork, the palace lights stabilized into their default calm spectrum, a reassuring pale blue that suggested everything was under control now, even if several corridors had opinions about that statement. Gravity settled fully, unapologetic in its return. The ancient maintenance chamber hummed with renewed confidence, its circuitry dimming as if satisfied it had done its duty and deserved a long rest. Ryan was painfully aware of the space between himself and Elara. It was not much, barely a step, but it felt like an ocean that had materialized out of nowhere. Defense drones hovered in formation nearby, weapons retracting with soft mechanical clicks. One of them emitted a cheerful chime. Threat neutralized, structural integrity at 98%, emotional integrity. It paused. Undetermined. Elara shot at a look. You are not authorized to assess that. Apologies, the drone replied, sounding faintly embarrassed. It drifted away. Ryan cleared his throat. His heart was still trying to escape his chest. Are you all right? She smiled at him, a little tired, a little overwhelmed. I was nearly abducted through a folded section of space by extremists with a philosophical grudge, she said. But aside from that, yes, perfectly fine. Good, he said. That's good. They stood there doing an excellent impression of two people who had not just confessed their love during a near-death experience. Elara broke first, rubbing her arms as if suddenly aware of the chill. "Well," she said, "that was certainly eventful." Ryan nodded. "I feel like I should apologize." "For what?" "For the timing," he said, "and the location, and possibly the existential implications." She laughed softly. "Ryan, if you had waited for a convenient moment, you might never have spoken at all." He winced. "Fair." Security personnel finally arrived in person. Humans, Aurelians, and a pair of extremely stressed-looking synthetic officers. They assessed the chamber, scanned Elara for injuries, scanned Ryan for reasons to glare at him, and began issuing orders that overlapped in confusing but well-meaning ways. "Elara," one of the senior guards said gently, "we need to escort you to the secure wing." She nodded, slipping back into her role with practiced ease. "Of course." Ryan instinctively moved to follow. Then he stopped. Protocol reasserted itself like a physical force. The reality of what they had said and done pressed in on him, heavy and unavoidable. He straightened, face carefully neutral again, and resumed his official position. Half a step behind. Close, but not too close, Elara noticed. Her ears dipped almost imperceptibly. The walk through the palace was quiet, though not peaceful. Repair drones buzzed overhead, stitching reality back together. Sections of the palace shimmered as systems recalibrated, corridors briefly overlapping with themselves before deciding which version they preferred. Somewhere, a ceiling apologized for the inconvenience. When they reached the secure wing, the doors sealed behind them with a finality that made Ryan's chest tighten. Medical scans, status briefings, reassurances. Elara answered everything calmly, efficiently, her composure impeccable. Ryan stood guard, saying nothing, thinking far too much. When the last official finally left, Elara turned to him. "You don't have to stand there like that," she said gently. "I do," he replied. "At least for now." She studied him, eyes searching his face. "Are you regretting it?" "No," he said immediately. Then more carefully, "I'm processing the consequences." She smiled ruefully. "Ah, yes, those." Silence stretched between them again, heavier now than it had been in the maintenance chamber. There were no alarms to blame it on this time. "Ryan," she said at last, "the court will know. If they don't already, they will soon. Walls talk here." He glanced at the smooth surface beside them. "I believe that. There will be questions," she continued, "about propriety, about influence, about whether my guard captain has compromised my safety by caring too much." His jaw tightened. "I would never compromise your safety." "I know," she said softly. "That's the problem. They will too." He met her gaze then, really met it, and allowed the truth to settle. "If necessary," he said, "I'll request reassignment." Her breath caught. "Ryan, it might be the cleanest solution," he went on. "You remain untouched by scandal. I leave with my integrity intact. You're safe." "And miserable," she said quietly. He didn't answer. Elara stepped closer, closing that painful distance again. Not touching, just close enough that he could feel her presence, grounding and real. "I don't want a clean solution," she said. "I want an honest one." Outside the secure wing, the palace hummed steadily, a vast alien organism returning to equilibrium. Somewhere deep in its systems, logs were being written, decisions recorded, future complications quietly queued. Ryan inhaled slowly. "Then we'll need to be very careful." She smiled, a spark of familiar humor returning despite everything. "Careful seems to be your specialty." "Unfortunately." They shared a small, fragile laugh, aware that the hardest part was only beginning. The crisis had passed. The confession had been made. Now came the far more dangerous work of figuring out what it meant to keep loving each other in a universe that had rules for everything except this. The palace recovered faster than the people inside it. Within a single cycle, fractured corridors had decided where they belonged. Gravity resumed behaving with professional consistency, and the lighting returned to a flattering spectrum chosen by a committee that took its job far too seriously. The Aurelian court announced that the recent spatial disagreement had been resolved, and that citizens should resume normal activities. preferably without folding reality again. Normal, however, had become a flexible concept. Ryan discovered this the next morning when he attempted to resume his duties and failed almost immediately. It wasn't the weapons check. That went fine. It wasn't the security briefing, though the junior officers kept glancing at him with the kind of curiosity normally reserved for experimental technology. It was the moment Princess Elara entered the chamber and smiled at him. Not widely, not recklessly, but with a softness that had absolutely no place in a professional environment. Ryan's implant helpfully flagged his heart rate as elevated. He ignored it. Elara took her seat at the council table, ears adorned with fresh data thread ornaments that pulsed gently with incoming reports. She looked composed, regal, and entirely too familiar. Ryan stationed himself at her side, exactly where he had stood 100 times before. Everything was the same. Everything was completely different. The council session began with routine updates. Trade, defense, a proposal to replace the Western transit gates with a more energy-efficient model that hummed less judgmentally. Ryan listened with half an ear, scanning the room, cataloging threats, trying very hard not to notice the way Elara's fingers tapped twice against the table whenever she was amused. At one point, she leaned toward him, barely a movement. "Ambassador Trelk is wearing his argumentative armor again," she whispered. Ryan glanced at the amphibious diplomat, indeed encased in ceremonial plating, that suggested both confidence and poor ventilation. That means he plans to disagree with gravity. Again? Passionately. She bit back a smile. Ryan did not. One of the council drones rotated slightly toward him, optics narrowing. "Captain Ryan," it chimed, "your facial expression appears to indicate fondness." "I am allergic to your observations," Ryan muttered. The drone paused. Duly noted. Despite themselves, both he and Elara stifled laughter. Several council members noticed. One raised an eyebrow. Another made a note. After the session, things did not improve. They tried to be careful. They truly did. They avoided unnecessary conversation. They stood at appropriate distances. They spoke formally in public. Unfortunately, none of this prevented small, treacherous moments from happening. Ryan reached for a security panel and found Elara's hand already there. They froze, pulled away simultaneously, pretended it was nothing. Elara dismissed a meeting and turned directly toward him instead of addressing the room, corrected herself mid-sentence, apologized to a hologram. During a patrol of the inner gardens, Ryan automatically adjusted his stride to match hers, as he always had. This time she noticed, and slowed deliberately, forcing him to either break formation or walk beside her. He chose neither. He tripped over a bioluminescent root instead. "I meant that metaphorically," she said, trying not to laugh as he regained his balance. "I'm adapting," he replied stiffly. "Poorly." Rumors spread the way they always did in a palace full of advanced sensors and board aides. Not openly, not boldly. Just enough glances, just enough pauses in conversation. The walls did in fact talk, mostly to each other. Ryan heard his name paired with words like attachment, complication, and historically inconvenient. Elara heard hers paired with romantic, human, and bold choice. None of it was official. All of it mattered. One evening they found themselves alone again, not by design, but by accident and poor scheduling. A temporary power fluctuation sealed a small observation lounge, leaving them facing the stars through a wide, curved viewport. The planet's rings glowed softly beyond the glass. They stood on opposite sides of the room. This lasted approximately 12 seconds. Elara broke first. "This is ridiculous." "Yes," Ryan said. "I've been saying that internally all day." She walked toward him, stopping just short of touching, close enough that the space between them felt intentional rather than enforced. "We can't keep pretending nothing happened," she said. "I'm not pretending," he replied. "I'm delaying." She smiled sadly. "That's worse." He exhaled, shoulders finally lowering. "If I stay," he said, "they'll question every decision I make. Every step I take near you will be scrutinized. And if you leave," she said, "I lose the person who knows how I take my tea and when I'm about to make a disastrous joke in a formal setting." He looked at her. really looked. Long ears relaxed, eyes bright and honest in a way her people valued above all else. "Do you know what the court fears most?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Uncontrolled truth," she said. "They believe feelings must be managed, regulated, placed neatly into categories. You and I are inconveniently sincere." Ryan huffed a quiet laugh. "We should apologize to the galaxy." "Later," she said. Outside the viewport, a distant ship slipped into hyperspace, bending light as it vanished. The universe continued, indifferent and vast. Inside, two people stood at the edge of a choice neither duty nor protocol could make for them. Careful had kept them safe. Honesty, Elara suspected, was about to change everything. The court did not explode when Elara finally spoke. Ryan had expected shouting, outrage, perhaps at least one ceremonial fainting. He had imagined guards escorting him out, his career dissolving in polite disgrace. He had even rehearsed a speech in which he resigned with dignity, honesty, and only a minimal amount of visible heartbreak. Instead, the court listened. They gathered in the central chamber, beneath constellations that rearranged themselves slowly, as if curious. Elara stood alone at the dais. Ryan stood where he always did, no longer half a step behind, but deliberately to the side, visible and unmistakably present. That choice alone caused murmurs. Elara did not raise her voice. She did not dramatize. She simply told the truth, the way her people believe truth should be told, plainly, without armor. She spoke of the attack, of trust forged under pressure, of a guard captain who had protected her body and, against all regulation, her heart. She acknowledged the imbalance of power, the danger of perception, the risks to her rule. Then she spoke of choice. "I will not pretend," she said calmly, her long ears angled forward in the traditional posture of resolve. "I will not rule by hiding parts of myself deemed inconvenient. If honesty is our highest value, then it must apply to me as well." Someone cleared their throat. Someone else shifted uncomfortably. Ambassador Trelk attempted to object, then appeared to realize that even gravity was ignoring him today. Ryan stood very still, not because he was afraid, but because for the first time, stillness was no longer a shield. He was present, exposed, honest. The deliberation that followed was long, complex, and deeply bureaucratic. Committees were invoked. Historical precedents were argued, some of them embarrassingly romantic. At one point, a council drone projected a statistical model suggesting that banning love outright would reduce palace morale by 40%. This was met with alarm. In the end, the court ruled not with enthusiasm, but with acceptance. Ryan would no longer serve as Elara's personal guard. That role would be redistributed among a rotating unit, removing the appearance of undue influence. In exchange, Ryan was offered a new position, strategic security advisor to the crown, one step removed from constant proximity, but not from her life. Elara accepted without hesitation. Ryan did too, though he suspected his hands were shaking. The palace adapted, as it always did. Corridors adjusted, schedules shifted. The walls, after a brief period of gossip, grew quiet again. Life found a new pattern. Weeks passed. Ryan learned how to exist without standing directly behind Elara. It was harder than facing armed extremists. He learned to speak in council chambers, to argue policy instead of scanning exits. He learned that influence could be exercised without armor, and that trust once earned had weight. Elara learned too. She learned how to rule while being watched more closely than ever. She learned how to let herself be known without apology. She learned that vulnerability, like courage, could be practiced. They found each other in smaller moments now. Shared meals without ceremony, quiet walks through gardens that glowed in response to emotional proximity, much to their mutual embarrassment. Conversations that wandered from galactic politics to whether humans were correct in believing that coffee was medicinal. "It is bitter," Elara said once, sipping thoughtfully, "and yet you persist." "It builds character," Ryan replied. "I believe that is what humans say when they suffer voluntarily." They laughed more easily now. The tension that once wrapped itself around every interaction had softened into something warm and resilient. On the anniversary of the attack, they returned together to the old maintenance chamber. It had been sealed, preserved as part of the palace's history, a reminder of fragility and stubborn survival. The ancient circuitry still pulsed steadily. "This is where you scared me half to death," Elara said. "This is where I ruined my career," Ryan replied. She smiled. "You changed it." He considered that. The man who had once believed duty meant silence would not have spoken here. The man who had measured his worth by proximity would not have stepped away. "I think," he said slowly, "I finally learned the difference between standing close and standing honestly." She took his hand then, openly, without looking around first. The palace lights warmed slightly, entirely unprofessional. Beyond the viewport, ships slipped between stars, civilizations continued, reality held. They did not pretend the future would be simple. Politics rarely were. Love never was. But they faced it together, not as a guard and a princess hiding behind rules, but as two people who had stopped pretending. And in a universe obsessed with order, that quiet honesty proved to be the most revolutionary thing of all.